just some thoughts about this week's Torah portion. For me, this was inspired as I got onto a busy elevator last week. I was in Boston at a busy hospital, MGH, and got on the elevator, and it was one of those moments, you've probably had those, where it's packed full, but I had to get up to visit a patient, and so I had that dilemma. Do you get on that full elevator? Everybody's giving you that look like you're not getting on this full elevator, right? But if you've been to MGH, you know how slow the elevators are. So I just said, I'm going for it. I got on, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm not even claustrophobic. It had nothing to do with small spaces, but something happens to us when we get into these elevators and we lose our sense of personal space. I think you all know what I'm talking about. Certainly, Reverend Swindle, Chuck Swindle, knows what I'm talking about, because when I was in there, I was thinking of a teaching that he shared, I read about a long time ago. So Reverend Swindle was on an elevator just like me, but he had a little more chutzpah. So what did he do, right? Because he realized, the same thing I realized, the same thing you realize, is you don't talk on an elevator, right? You don't make eye contact on an elevator. What do? In this day and age, you look at your iPhone, or you look down at the floor, you look at the numbers. All these people staring at the numbers because it's just so uncomfortable. So what did Reverend Swindle do? As the door closed and everybody's looking at him, he said, I want to thank you for being here as I've called this meeting to join us all together. And everybody burst out laughing, and it disrupted that pattern of discomfort, of that uncomfortable feeling when everybody's packed in close quarters. I also found this, fun things to do on the elevator to break awkward tension. I haven't tried any of these, but I'm actually inspired to try some of them, not all of them. Hum the theme song from Mission Impossible, and speak into your lapel and say, right, Jim. Right? When there's only one other person in the elevator, tap them on the shoulder and pretend it wasn't you. Push a button and pretend it gave you a shock. Smile and go back for more. Ask others in the elevator which floor they're going to, then push the wrong buttons. Enforce a group hug. I like that one. Open your purse slightly and say, do you have enough air in there? Make race car noises when anybody gets on or off. This is my favorite. Greet everyone getting on the elevator with a warm handshake and ask them to call you Admiral. When the elevator is silent, look around and ask, is that your beeper? Draw a little square on the floor with chalk and announce to other passengers, this is my personal space. Because really, that's the point, isn't it? That when people get into our personal space and we feel that sense of disruption, we feel uncomfortable. I mean, these things wouldn't be funny outside of an elevator, but inside of an elevator, it speaks to the tension that we all feel in this modern age. I've been rereading a great book. If you haven't read it, it's not easy reading, but it's important reading. It's a book that came out in the 90s by Robert Putnam, the Harvard professor, called Bowling Alone. It was a very important kind of study, breakthrough analysis of where we are as a culture, as a society. And in it, I mean, the title alone is just worth its weight in gold, Bowling Alone. But that's his thesis, that things have changed radically in the past 40, 50 years, since the 60s. Because as many of you know, maybe you participated, there used to be a thing called bowling groups. Not this candlepin bowling, I don't get that, I'm sorry, no offense, but real bowling with the grown-ups version, right? But bowling, maybe you were in bowling leagues. That's disappeared. I mean, bowling leagues have gone away. Now people bowl alone, but they do everything alone, right? All kinds of fraternal organizations, men's organizations, women's organizations, civics groups, knitting groups have disbanded, have disappeared, because that's the world we live in. We have created a world where, even they've done this statistically, this isn't just anecdotal, they've figured out that people are inviting people over less to their homes for dinner, less frequently. People don't play cards together as much anymore. And if you look at the groups who do this, by and large, they tend to be an older group coming from a different generation where people came together and participated in all kinds of activities and events, which now we do alone. There has to be consequences to this new reality, not just elevators and the discomfort we find there, but the reality of the discomfort we find or the lack of interest we have in joining in groups and participating in community. There has to be consequences, and I think there are. And I think this week's Torah portion points to some of those consequences. In this week's Torah portion, we have Yitro. I can no longer call him Jethro, right? That name has been ruined forever by the Beverly Hillbillies. So Yitro, that's the Hebrew name, that's what we're going to call him. Yitro is Moses' father-in-law. Yitro was not Jewish, which is an important conversation unto itself. Yitro is Moses' mentor. And he sees what Moses is doing in this week's Torah portion, and he gives him tochacha, as we say in Hebrew. He gives him some fatherly advice, some fatherly love, little rebuke. So what is he doing? We read the following. It came about that the next day Moses sat down to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So Moses is sitting, the people are standing, and what is he doing? He's adjudicating law. And his father says to him, Madua ata yeshev levadecha, right? Why are you sitting levadecha? It's an important word we'll come back to, alone. Moses said to his father-in-law, for the people come to me to seek God. And Moses said, if any of them has a case, they come to me, and I judge between them, and I make God's teachings known. And what does Yitro say? Lo tov hadavar asher ata oseh. This thing is lo tov. Another couple Hebrew words we're coming back to. It's not good what you're doing. Why? You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people, for the matter is too heavy for you, livadecha, to go it alone. Right? Yitro is teaching Moses a very important lesson. That some things in life you should do alone. You should be alone. Individuality and autonomy has its place. It certainly does. But some things, not only should you not do alone, you can't do alone, like what Moses is doing. Right? It's not good for Moses on many levels. First of all, there's a burnout factor of trying to create a community alone, lead a community alone. And Yitro is worried that Moses is going to simply burn out. And if you read a little bit later on, that's exactly what happens. Moses loses his patience. His nerves are frayed. He's worn thin. In a few weeks, we're going to read about when he hits the rock, right? Instead of speaking to the rock. What really is that about? It's about a leader who has experienced burnout, who is no longer fit to lead. It's ineffective, right? This is not the best way to lead. It's not the best way to lead a community. You've got to share the wealth. You've got to disperse the power. Judaism, by definition, is democratic. We believe Moses was just a man. He was not the Messiah, right? In Judaism, there is no middleman. We each have our relationship with God. We each have a role to take on in a community. There's also an arrogance about it. It's interesting. Moses is called the most humble man to have ever lived, what's interesting about that is, who wrote that? Moses. Moses wrote that he's the most humble man to ever live. That's kind of like a Zen koan. Can't even understand that. But nonetheless, he's supposedly such a humble man. However, Yitro, his father-in-law, is worried that he is going to lose his sense of humility. He's going to become arrogant. If you only take on power and you never share power, it's inevitable that that's what will happen. But the worst thing that Yitro sees happening, and he sees it happening, and we see it happening in Moses, is this word livadecha. So when's the first time we see this word levad, levado? Anybody know? I've shared it many times. Pop quiz. Garden of Eden, right? So the Garden of Eden, what happens? Adam is created, and he's put into the garden, and he's searching for something that isn't there, because the text says he's levado. He's not alone, right? He's lonely. Again, being alone has its time and its place, especially in a world where we're basically on top of each other, where we live next door and everything's busy and chaotic. You need times to be alone. There's nothing wrong with being alone, but livado, lonely, is a problem. What does God say to Adam? Lo tov heodot adam levado. It is not good. The same thing that Yitro said, lo tov. What does lo tov mean? Lo tov doesn't mean that it's not nice or pleasant. When was tov used for the first time in the Bible, in the Torah? In the creation story. God creates, and it's tov. Creation is good. What's the antithesis of creation? What undoes creation, according to this teaching? Loneliness. Loneliness is the antithesis of creation. Loneliness is what leads to destruction. In the garden, it's when the snake enters in, the snake, nachash, doubt. It's when their relationship falls apart, when they're lonely. It's when the garden is destroyed out of loneliness. And if you look around the world around us today, loneliness is behind all kinds of disasters and atrocities, like what took place in Newtown, Connecticut, right? One of the common denominators that all of these shooters have, unfortunately, in recent history, is A, they're men, they're boys, and B, their case history of loneliness, of depression, of being cut off, right? It's a common denominator. It doesn't explain away why they do bad things, but it's an ingredient in the process of bad things happening. Loneliness never leads to anything good, according to our tradition. And we know that, and Yitro knows that, and he tells Moses, so what do you need in your life to overcome this loneliness? You need colleagues, you need a family, right? Brother and sister, Aaron and Miriam, get Moses through the difficult times. You need mentors in Yitro, right? Yitro, the Midianite priest, becomes a mentor to Moses. He needs these things. We all need these things because now, like never before, we are disconnected. And it's an interesting phenomenon. We've never been more connected in some sense. I was just reading in, I think it was the Boston Globe this morning, how people are so impatient in this day and age that we won't wait for 10 seconds while a web page uploads because we want connection, communication within 2 seconds or we are off to the next page, right? We won't sit around and wait. We want immediate connection, and we have it, and yet we've never been more disconnected. You can sometimes go through an entire day without speaking to another human being. You can bank without communicating to a human being. You can go do your shopping at Stop and Shop without communicating with a human being. You just go out through the automated checkout. I don't even go to the dry cleaners anymore, right? They drop it off at my house. Periodically, I'll see the person who's delivering it. But by and large, it's a go-it-alone society. And that's not the worst part of it. The worst part is that we revere this go-it-alone mentality. And it has its place, go it alone, but it's also problematic. So I like to Google these ideas, and I Googled self-made man or self-made woman. It's interesting what comes up when you look at self-made man or woman, right? Who comes up? Individuals that we glow about. Bill Gates, J.K. Rowling, Oprah Winfrey, Michael Jordan, Michael Dell. Those are the top hits when you Google self-made man or self-made woman. Why? Because these are stories about men and women who tell their story that they overcame adversity alone, right? That they went it alone, they go it alone, and they succeeded in many ways alone. That's not the entirety of the story, but it's certainly a legend that underlies a lot of their stories. It's the legend of myths and movies. The problem is, it's not true. Nobody goes it alone. Actually, this idea of self-made man, as I was studying and reading, was coined by Benjamin Franklin. In his autobiography, he talks about how he was a self-made man. He was a son of a candlestick maker. He was basically a nobody, he tells the story, and he became a somebody, a very important somebody in certainly history, in American history. And you start looking at the other figures who revered this idea of going it alone. Here's one that I came across. Frederick Douglass, in 1895, he gave a speech called Self-Made Men. And he wrote, self-made men are the men who owe little or nothing to birth, to relationships, to friendly surroundings, to the people in their lives, to wealth inherited, to early approved means of education, who are what they are without the aid of any favoring conditions by which other men usually rise in the world and achieve great results. Great men and women are self-made men and women, according to Frederick Douglass, and that's romantic and it's mythical, but the problem is it's not true. I'm going to bring one of my favorite books back into this conversation, and that, of course, is Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell. This is the 68th time I've spoken about it or mentioned it, and I'm going to keep bringing it up because he says the exact opposite as Ben Franklin or Frederick Douglass. What did Malcolm Gladwell set out to do in Outliers? He set out to disprove this myth that we go it alone. We do nothing alone. Ultimately, we don't succeed alone. He said we are so caught up in myths of best and brightest and self-made that we think outliers, great men and women, spring naturally forth from the earth. People don't rise from nothing. We do owe something to parents, to patronage. The people who stand before kings may look like they did it all by themselves, but in fact, they invariably are the beneficiaries of hidden advantages. The rest of the book is talking about hidden advantages, being born into a particular time, into a particular culture, into a particular family, with our particular surroundings are what leads to greatness. Yes, with our say-so, with our effort, with our know-how, but none of us ultimately go it alone. And I was thinking about this because anytime I'm sitting with a person during a time of surus, right? They don't get through the surus. They don't get through the suffering going it alone. I'll be visiting somebody who's lost a loved one, and people, friends, are turning up at the Shiva Minyan. And that's how we get through loss, by friends and family and community showing up. We just did the healing Haftarah, where we send our love and our prayers out to those who are feeling alone. But we don't just send love and prayers. As I always say, we cook chicken soup and we visit them. I was just with Elaine Merkin at the hospital, and she was felling over how so many of you have been showing up and tending to her. And there's so many individuals. Elaine's in the hospital. She had a fall last week. And when Sherm, right? When Sherm has been away, I know that so many of you have asked about his well-being and checked in with Faith and the family, because we were concerned, because that's how we get through these difficult times. We get through them as family coming together, and we get through them as community coming together. And if you think about it, there's virtually nothing that we do that ultimately is alone. I mean, I had a piece of toast for breakfast this morning, and I thought about how many people were involved in bringing that single piece of toast to my plate. It's staggering when you take a step back and you realize, right, there's a person who plants the seed, a farmer. There's migrant workers in this past week's debate who are there to do the work that other people, American citizens, oftentimes don't want to do, and they come and they do some of this hard work for us, and then it goes off to manufacturers and all of the process of manufacturing, and then to truck drivers taking it to stores, and then to the clerks in the stores. I was just looking at the little twist tie on the plastic bag that it came in. How many people with just that little twist tie were involved in bringing that idea to conception, to bringing it to my bag on the bread that I was eating? Hundreds, maybe thousands of individuals with a little piece of toast. And this is what's so interesting. What do we say over that piece of toast? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Thank you, God, for bringing this bread out of the earth. But what's so interesting is God didn't bring the bread out of the earth. People brought the bread out of the earth and to the supermarket and to our plate. But that's the point, because we Jews believe that God is found in that process of people coming together and working together and bringing forth from the ground, right, something as magical and mystical and profound as a little piece of bread. And that's why Shirat Hayam, I believe, is so important. Not just for the bread that we serve in a little bit, although that's a piece of it, right? I always invite people just to come for lunch. And that strikes some people as strange. Some people, it feels like that's not kosher. But who are we to say that's not kosher if that provides for them a social context, a community to come and to be a part of and to join in? That is as holy in our tradition as standing up and saying the Musaf, the Amidah, the standing prayer. That's why I'll stand up here in a few minutes and I'll say at the Shabbat Cafe, we don't save seats, we save souls. Kind of proud of that one. Why? Because that's exactly what we do here. We don't save seats and say go away. We save souls by bringing people into community and inviting them in. That's why membership is not a barrier to being a part of this community. You do not have to pay dues or contribute in any way other than showing up and opening your heart. Now, yes, membership is important. Just like standing under the chuppah and committing to another person is important. But there isn't a single price that we can put on that membership. For everybody, it's different. For some, it might be a shekel, and for some, it might be beyond the set dues. The important point is that we commit to a relationship. The important point is that we feel welcomed into the relationship. And so that's what we do here at Shirat Hayam, and that's what we will continue to do. And I'll end with these words of Heschel, who said, "We pray with the whole community, and every one of us stands in that community. We count on others to support us in a quest for connection with ourselves, with others, with God." This week's Torah portion had in it the verse, "Kedoshim tihiyu," right? You shall be holy. And what's interesting about it? It's you, plural, atem. We don't find holiness ultimately as individuals. We find holiness in community. And that's what we have done here at Shirat Hayam, and that's what we will continue to do, to shatter the sense of livado, of loneliness in people's lives, because livado, loneliness, is always lo tov. It's not good. And we've replaced it with a sense of congregation, of community, of connection, and that is always tov.